Hi everyone. For this last section, what we're going to do is look at some basic ethical theories. And the reason I want to do this is for most of you, you will end up doing a class in ethics at some point. So I want to introduce you to some of the main ethical theories that you might encounter in the class. So at least the names will be familiar, but we'll go through them a little bit just so that you have the basic idea of it, and then I'll go on to what you're going to do this week, so, and how you'll practice these a little bit. So to begin, what we want to recognize here is that when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about the actions, and it's the actions that a person ought to do. It's not necessarily what they do, but what they ought to do in a given situation. And ethical reasoning and ethical judgments are the way we go about determining whether that is the action that ought to be done in a particular context. To make these judgments, what we do is rely on theories, and it's the study of ethics that looks at these theories. This doesn't mean everybody knows what these ethical theories are. There's a difference between ethics and morals. People are moral, that's their personal ethical beliefs and their personal moral beliefs. Ethics is the study of the standards and theories on which ethical judgments are based. And it's a very specific area of study within philosophy. So when we're doing this, we want to know what these theories are. And the first distinction we want to look at here is we're talking about an action. So the action is represented by the circle. And ethical reasoning is going to judge that action. But if we think about any action, there's two parts to it. The first is the intention. What's the motive a person has for doing the action? The other aspect of it that comes after the action is the outcome or the result. And depending on which one of these things we use, we can then determine a different ethical theory. So if this is why we end up with three general classifications of ethics. If one looks at the motive, at the intention, whether it's a good intention, is it what we should be doing because it's the right thing to do, that's a deontological ethics. And there's a couple versions of these. I'm going to use Kant's deontological ethics, but there's also one known as divine command theory. So there's different versions of this ethics. If we look at the outcome, we're going to judge the action based on the result. These are consequentialist ethics. So we're trying to make a prediction on what's the best result, and the action we think it has the best result is the one that's judged to be morally correct. Okay? So we won't really know until we find out what the action was and the results of it to know for sure whether it was the morally correct thing, but we do have a basis then for judging it. Now, the two main ones of this are ethical egoism and utilitarianism, and we'll focus on utilitarianism since that's more common than ethical egoism. But it's looking at the results of the action, and that's why they're consequential ethics. The third one is to go back to the circle. The action that we're doing is always done by a person. It's called the agent. So whenever someone does an action, we can judge the action that that person does by looking at the character of the person. This is called virtue ethics. So even though that circle has two areas, we have to remember that's an action. Somebody has to do the action. So we can judge the action either on the intention of the person doing the action, which are deontological. We can look at the results of the action and make a judgment on the action in that case. Or we can judge the action based on the character of the person. What is that person doing? Is it a good person that's doing the action? Are they trying to exhibit a certain virtue by doing this action? So we would use the good person, a virtuous person, to use as our standard then for judging other people whether they live up to that standard. So those are the three main areas we're going to look at. Those are where the ethic theories break down. Okay, and as I noted, there's different versions of each of these for different theories. So deontology has Kantian ethics, which is the most well-known deontological ethics, but there's divine command theory. Consequentialist is ethical egoism, which looks at the results for the person doing the action. So if it's good for that person, it's the best result for that person, that's morally correct action according to ethical egoism. If it's the best overall result for everyone who's affected by the action, that's going to be a utilitarian consequentialist ethics. Utilitarianism is the one that's more well known. And then virtue ethics, Aristotle is the most well-known person associated with this, but there are some more modern versions of virtue ethics as well. So what I'm going to do in this is explain how each of these theories is applied, so you have a basis and understanding of how they're made. Judgments are made using these ethics. All right, to begin, we'll look at virtue ethics. Okay? And what we're going to do when we apply virtue ethics, and we use that as the basis for making a moral decision, is to look at the character of a person. So if we want to ask, in this case, what is an honest person? A person who always tells the truth. So we can ask, how do you achieve the virtue of honesty? Well, you don't become honest just by telling the truth once. It's a matter of telling the truth consistently over time. You're honest. People know that you're going to be telling the truth. You're not going to be lying. So it builds up. It's the character then that's developed of each person. And we want to use that then to judge an ethics. So, big or small lies are lies. So that's the claim. So does an honest person always have to tell the truth? Okay? Are there times where an honest person could be telling a lie? Well, it might be the case. A little white lie doesn't make a person a non-honest person. They're still honest, we would say, because there's a character that's developed. We expect them to tell the truth. And they understand the difference of when it's good or bad. So how do we use this then to determine whether a person's doing a morally correct action? We can look at something like Snape in the Harry Potter movies. He's lying all the time, but he's doing it to hide his deception to bring down Lord Voldemort. Okay? So we know he's really a good person. He's not telling the truth, but he's an honest person in what he's doing. People who know him know what his character is, and that's the basis of it. Now, one of the problems with virtue ethics is that sometimes these virtues conflict. So honesty may conflict with compassion. And those are both virtues, and people can develop those in their character. But if I'm honest, I may have to tell somebody something that's gonna hurt them, and that makes it a problem. And what do we do? Do we kind of couch the truth? Do we tell them flat out truth, even though it's going to harm them? Do we kind of hide the truth because it protects the person? That's one of the problems with virtue ethics. For our work this week, we're not going to go into much into virtue ethics, but wanted to let you know about this one because it is becoming more of a common ethical theory for people to rely on when they're making ethical judgments. So now we'll get into the main ones. And the first one we're going to talk about is deontology. And again, this starts with the idea that we're going to look at the intention of the person. And a good intention is one where the person is doing an action because it is what is morally correct. That is their motive. They're not worried about whether it's going to produce a good result, but they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. That's their motive. They're going to adhere to that. So the way Kant sets this up is he's going to use the idea of if it's the right thing to do, people are acting out of goodwill. They're trying to do what's right. We have to judge what is a goodwill. And that's one that an action can be done by everybody in the same situation. So one of the things I came up with here is, excuse me, should there be tip jars where there's minimum wage jobs? So like you see them all the time at deli counters, little stores where people do things, mostly in fast food type situations where they have these, because people are not making a lot of money off of this. So the question is, could we apply this, if we think it's the morally correct thing to do to allow that to happen, could we apply it in any other context? And the question then becomes, is it okay to pay for an additional service? Because by tipping, people are going to pay attention more to you. So should McDonald's do it? If it's okay in the deli situation, why isn't there a tip jar at McDonald's? Why isn't there one at Walmart? Okay, those are the people are in the same situation in terms of working for minimum wage. But can we apply this idea that it's okay to do it in one context in another, where it's the similar situation? And the idea here is that we're focusing on the universalizability of the action. It's a form of the will. Can I take what my motive is and say everybody in that similar situation should do the exact same thing? If you can say yes, because it's the right thing to do, then you're making a judgment that the action is correct. We're not looking at the consequences, we're looking at the motive that some people do. Okay? And another way to think about this, and then really the easier way to do it, is we should never treat people as a means to our ends. Okay? They're self-determining individuals, they have free will, they should be able to make their own decisions on how to act. If I treat them as means to my ends, I'm taking that away from them. I'm not treating them the same way I should be treated, and I want to be treated. And if that sounds familiar, what you just recognize is that deontology, at least in Kant's version, is a version of the golden rule. Okay? Especially when we get to the variation of it where we never treat people as means. Okay? You treat people the way you want to be treated. Okay? Because you're recognizing that they are the same type of being as you are, a rational being. So they have the ability to make their own choices, just as you have the ability to make your own choices. So our actions should be things that are universalizable and that allow everyone to act on their rational, their ability to reason and think, and without being forced to do something they wouldn't necessarily want to choose for themselves. So the idea is, look at the intention of the action. Is it something that everybody in that same situation could do if it was made to be, that's the law, the natural law that they automatically do it, convert it into instinct, and that they automatically do it? And how do we judge that then? So it's a matter of consistency that we're looking at for deontology. Okay? It's probably the hardest theory to grasp hold of, but think of it in terms of the golden rule. Okay? And finally, the main one, and this is the most common ethical theory out there, and it's utilitarianism. And this is the idea that an action should be judged on the results of the action, and the morally correct action is the one that produces the most overall good for everyone who's affected by the action. So yeah, my actions help or hurt me, but they also help or hurt other people. And since we're all humans, we should all be counted equally. So how much help I get from an action should be balanced against how much it harms someone else. And you got to take into that account of how much help and harm the action produces. Then you have to compare it to all of the other possible actions that are out there and judge it in the same way. Does that action help or hurt me? Does it help or hurt other people? How much is the net result of it, and compare it to the first action. Any other actions, you got to do the same thing. So the process is, if we look at it in terms of euthanasia, what can be gained by allowing euthanasia? So really I picked this one because you have two choices. We allow it or we don't allow it. And that's simplifying it a little bit because there's different versions of euthanasia. So the first thing we'd want to do if we're applying euthanasia is consider all the positives and all the people who are positively affected by allowing euthanasia and how much benefit they get out of it. So it ends the person's suffering. It saves money for the family if they don't have to deal with long-term care. Those are a couple of the things you're looking at. There's a lot more you would have to consider. But then you have to consider the negatives. Well, the negatives are that the family has to make that decision to pull the plug on somebody, and that's going to be a very big negative of doing this. You're putting a lot of responsibility on certain people that they may not be comfortable doing. Well, it's a negative of allowing it then. Now, so then we balance it out, figure out how much net result, how much does the positives outweigh the negatives, do the negatives outweigh the positive, whatever it is, you're going to have a net result. Then we have to turn it around. What's the positives of not allowing it? Well, you save that family a lot of grief. You open up the possibility that a treatment for the person could be found. Okay, we don't have that as a positive. It's a possibility for allowing it, so now we have another positive. But there's also negatives for not allowing it. Mainly for the person who's going through suffering. If they're suffering, they got to endure more suffering. That can be really harmful. It's harmful for the family. They have to watch this suffering. There's a cost to it, to keeping a person alive and suffering. So there's medical treatment that has to be paid for. So there's positives and negatives. So all actions have positive and negatives, and those are the results. So again, what we're going to do is take the positives and the negatives of not allowing it, balance them out, and you got to do some kind of calculation. And this is one of the problems, is how do we judge what measure a positive and negative of things like suffering. And versus money. You know, it's easy to calculate in terms of money, but suffering, you can't really quantify it in terms of money. So we've got to measure out the positives and negatives allowing and get a net result. Then we're going to take the net results of allowing it versus the net results of not allowing it. Whichever one produces the most positive net result or the least negative, if they're both negative, is the action that's morally correct according to euthanasia. But you have to look at both sides. So what we're doing here is looking at the greatest positives for everyone who's affected. We don't just consider our own selves in this situation, but anybody who's affected by the action. So if you're the person doing the action, yes, you're going to be impacted by it. But at the same time, a lot of other people are going to be impacted by the action. So you have to take into account how they are impacted as well. You're just one among many and you're equal to every other person. That's the key thing it's trying to overcome. Okay? So that's the process of utilitarianism. So for week 8, what we're looking at here, week 8, you're going to have discussion. And the discussion is going to be based on the trolley problem, which will be the next movie. And I'll go through that situation a little bit. And the discussion then is to, in the trolley problem, you're going to pick one theory. And I'm going to limit you to utilitarianism or deontology theory. Don't worry about virtue ethics. You can use that for the optional one later. Pick one of those theories and apply it to both situations as described in the trolley problem. You can't switch the theory. You have to apply the same theory both times. And if it causes you to be uncomfortable in one of the situations, you're doing the discussion right. And I'll talk more about that in the other movie. Okay? Now, one of the things I do allow this week is give you an optional discussion. So some people miss one of the discussions. It's a chance to make up something you missed earlier in the term. It's a chance to get an extra P plus if you've only got 3 and you need 4 to get the A for the discussion grade. I give you an extra option here. So what you can do is take one of the other theories you did not use initially and discuss the trolley problem from that perspective. And you'll do the same thing. It's the same discussion. You're just going to apply a second theory in that case. But that's entirely optional. You do not have to do that if you don't want to. I just put it out there for people who want to use it. So for this week, if you've got any questions, just post them on the discussion board, send me an email, drop me a message, whatever. Good luck with the ethics. And as I said, this is just kind of an introduction to ethics.